what's up, everybody? Hope you're all doing good. Welcome back to What's Harder Than That from the Mike Show. And this week we are talking metal. Like I said last week, one of the coolest things you can do for a person is turn them on to new music. Your brain takes this little snapshot and you usually remember exactly where you were and who introduced you to the new music. While I was working at Tower Records, this happened often. We would have a 5-disc CD player behind the counter, and whoever was working the registers got to choose the music that played in the store. I got into so many bands there. I remember there was this really quiet kid named Ken, and he asked me one day, "Have you ever heard of the Bad Brains?" At the time, all I was listening to was stuff that was on the Shrapnel record label, and if it wasn't a shredding guitar player guy, I didn't want to hear it. But after giving the Bad Brains a shot, I thought, this is pretty good. Usually punk rock bands don't have like a shredding guitar player, but their guitar player could definitely play. But anytime I would get into a band, after a while, I'd always start wondering, what's harder than that? Like I said earlier, this week we're covering metal. And for me, heavy equals number 1, sick guitar tone and even sicker riffs. 2, the drummer playing on point, going from double bass to a meat and potato stomp beat with a little sprinkle of blast beats in there. 3, the vocals need to have some power, clean highs or filthy gutturals. I'll take either one. And number 4, you should sound like you're ringing the devil's doorbell. I remember some of the older kids I was hanging out with back in the day, they were super into Kiss. So I got into Kiss. But after a while, I would wonder, what's harder than Kiss? Quiet Riot. Their album Metal Health was the first album to top the Billboard charts. What's harder than that? Def Leppard. Those first few albums are still classics. You can try to argue with me, but you'll be wrong. Now, what's harder than that? Judas Priest. The singer was hitting the highest notes. The guitar players were doing all these harmony solos. They had a metal eagle on their album cover. What could be harder than that? Iron Maiden. They had Eddie and the coolest artwork. Every song is a history lesson. Boom, then I discovered Wasp. They threw raw meat out into the crowd at their shows. They had saw blades everywhere and a song called I Fuck Like a Beast. What's harder than that? Then I discovered Motley Crue. Crue were a lot like Kiss, but instead of the bass player breathing fire, Motley's bass player lit his legs on fire. What's harder than that? Well, in my opinion, bands like Rat or Dokken, they both took the guitar playing up a notch or two. What's harder than that? Now, I was late to the Van Halen party. My introduction to them was the 1984 album. You know, where Eddie Van Halen influenced almost every guitar player on this list. It's hard to say that there's anything harder than Van Halen. But after a while, I got into a band called Danzig. If Elvis had a satanic rock band, this would be it. For some reason, most of my friends weren't into punk rock, so this was my intro to Danzig. I had to go back and check out his stuff with the Misfits later. What's harder than that? Whitesnake with John Sykes, one of the greatest rock and roll records ever. Great guitar riffs and excellent guitar tone, still to this day. What's harder than that? Well, I got into Bon Jovi for a while. I remember seeing them live, and they are one of the only bands I've ever seen that just dropped hit after hit after hit. What's harder than that? Well, Metallica comes out and does for metal bands what Van Halen did for rock bands, sending them all back to the drawing board. What's harder than that? Well, then Megadeth comes out and does what Metallica does, but faster and more pissed off. What's harder than that? Exodus, the AC/DC of metal, as I like to call them. They make one flavor of ice cream and it's blood flavored. What's harder than that? Slayer drops Rain of Blood, kicking the speed in metal up several notches and combining elements of hardcore and punk with metal, all while swearing allegiance to the devil. What's harder than that? Anthrax drops Among the Living. The riffs on this album are classic, and like Slayer, they were combining metal and hardcore, along with adding a little sprinkle of rap to the mix. Also, they were one of the first bands to add humor to metal. Now we're going to veer off the metal side and go to the more rock and roll side. Guns N' Roses. Like Van Halen, these guys inspired an entire generation of clones while pretty much killing off glam metal in the process. What's harder than that? Skid Row. Killer songs with great riffs and awesome vocals. Boss was one of the greatest hard rock singers ever. What's harder than that? Boom, King Diamond. Doing all the stuff that Judas Priest was doing while looking evil as fuck doing it. And speaking of hardcore earlier, around this time I did get into the Bad Brains, also Suicidal Tendencies and the Cro-Mags. What's harder than that? Pantera. Combining metal with a dash of hardcore, Pantera was keeping metal alive in a decade that grunge took over. Like Van Halen and Metallica before them, Pantera sent a lot of bands back to the drawing board. There's a whole bunch of videos on Pantera on my channel. Check them out. The 90s were a great time for metal. White Zombie came out with their first album, Las Exorcisto, that had this kooky pawn shop feel to it. The second album, Astro Creep 2000, takes the heavy up a notch. What's harder than that? Machine Head drops their classic album, Burn My Eyes, and it, like Slayer, combines metal with hardcore, but with a splash of hip-hop, kind of like Anthrax, but with zero humor. The End of Davidian is in my top 5 favorite breakdowns of all time. It might be number 1 in my opinion. What's harder than that? Well, when bands like Korn and the Deftones released their debut albums, Korn sent a few bands back to the drawing board and put 7-string guitars in the hands of a lot of kids, mine being one of them. When I joined the band Hurt, I only had 6-string guitars, and my singer Andy had to put a 7-string on his credit card for me. Hey man, thanks again for that. Now what's harder than that? My buddy Matt, whom I met at a Slayer show with Biohazard and Machine Head opening, turns me on to death metal with Cannibal Corpse. Holy shit, this is just riffs and Cookie Monster vocals. This rules. Then I discovered Morbid Angel. David Vincent, for me, is the gold standard of death metal vocals. I remember seeing Napalm Death at a club in town, and in between songs, the singer would talk to the audience in a regular voice. When I saw Morbid Angel, it was the low voice the entire time. What's harder than that? Fear Factory, combining techno and metal with precision riffs and drumming. That band invented the good cop, bad cop vocal style, going from cleans to yelling. What's harder than that? One day at band practice, my old drummer Darren Mentor brought in Meshuggah's Destroy, Erase, Improve. At first listen, it sounded like the band were all in separate rooms and someone just yelled, "Start playing," and they all started at the same time, but they were playing a different song. After a few listens, it clicked in what they were doing, and it was awesome. What's harder than that? Strapping Young Lad releases their debut album, Heavy as a Really Heavy Thing, and the sound is just a wall of pure metal. My first reaction to it was like, Metallica and Queen had a baby. The vocals can go from pure hatred to glorious harmonies. Another band that it's tough to say anything is harder than. After them, I got into Marilyn Manson for a while, signed by 9 Inch Nails as Trent Reznor. They changed the game with their brand of shock rock. What's harder than that? Then I see Slipknot, the metal version of the Wu-Tang Clan with 9 dudes in the band, and they combine different genres of metal. What's harder than that? Hatebreed, another band I consider to be like the AC/DC of hardcore and metal. If it ain't broke, don't fix it. What's harder than that? Bury Your Dead, metal and hardcore on steroids, super beefy riffs with super beefy vocals. What's harder than that? Arch Enemy, a supergroup whose members were in bands like Carcass and Merciful Fate, among others. I used to play Anthems of Rebellion and ask people what they thought the singer looked like. The answer most of the time was it was a guy with a shaved head. Then I would pull up a photo of Angela and blow their minds. She is the singer? How can a woman look like that and sing like that? What's harder than that? Suicide Silence, a deathcore band influenced by Korn. What's harder than that? Ymir, a deathcore band influenced by Limp Bizkit, who made the binary code guitar riffs famous. 000010011001111. What's harder than that? Killswitch Engage. These guys started in the New England metalcore scene and took off like a Def Leppard rocket, leaving the rest of the bands in their wake. What's harder than that? Speaking of wakes, Lamb of God. These guys are keeping metal alive with super tight riffs and even tighter drumming. What's harder than that? Acacia Strain, bludgeoning drums, riffs, and vocals. A nice blend of hardcore and metal with death metal style vocals. Side note, their old guitar player DL now sings for Bad Wolves. What's harder than that? Thy Art is Murder. Combine death metal and hardcore and you get deathcore. What's harder than that? Nowadays, Lorna Shore has taken the top heavy spot for me. They are so heavy that my friend Jeff is afraid to listen to them, instead wasting his time listening to Radiohead. Sick burn. In all seriousness, it's really hard to say what is heavier than what. Mostly, I just wanted to turn people on to new bands that they might not have heard before. So take this list with a grain of salt. There are plenty of bands out there that aren't even on this list that deserve a listen, and I'm positive that there are plenty of kids watching this that are thinking none of these bands are heavy. The same way that I don't think that Black Sabbath and Deep Purple are all that heavy. Yes, Black Sabbath invented this shit, and yes, I give them all the credit for it. But if you put Black Sabbath's Into the Void up against Morbid Angel's Where the Slime Live, it's not even close in my opinion. Now let's get some comment fights started down below. Who did I miss? Who's your heaviest band? Do I even know what the fuck I'm talking about? Also, check out the playlist on Spotify. There's a link in the description. I have been Mike, and you have been awesome. Till next time.